Jace hadn't planned any of it. He never did, honestly. His whole life had been built on plans. Hiking routes mapped 3 weeks in advance. Supply lists checked twice. Emergency protocols memorized until they lived in his muscles. He was the guy other people called when they were lost. The one who always knew which way was north without looking up. So when he packed his gear and drove 4 hours into the Cascade Range alone, no clients, no schedule, no one waiting on him at the trailhead, it felt like the first honest breath he'd taken in years. He just needed quiet. The mountain kind. The kind that presses against your eardrums and makes you realize how loud your own head has been. He set up camp near the ridge on his second day in. Cooked over an open fire. Listened to the wind move through the pines like something ancient trying to talk. He slept better than he had in months. No dreams. Just dark and cold and the low creak of trees. The fireball had come 3 weeks before that. He'd seen it on the news the same as everyone else. A streak of blue-white light cutting across the Pacific Northwest sky at 2 in the morning, caught on about 40 different doorbell cameras. Scientists said meteor. The government said debris from a defunct satellite. Some people online said other things. Jace hadn't given it much attention. He'd seen shooting stars before. He didn't have the bandwidth for conspiracy theories. He remembered thinking it looked close, though. On the news footage. Close enough to make the anchors nervous. He forgot about it inside of a week. The storm came in on his 3rd night without warning. Not unusual for high elevation in late September. The weather up there doesn't consult anyone's forecast. It just decides. Within 40 minutes, the temperature dropped 15 degrees. Rain turned sideways, and the ridge he'd camped on became a wind tunnel that tore his tarp loose before he could secure it properly. He spent an hour managing gear in the dark, soaked through, annoyed. He'd handled worse. But when he finally got everything battened down and ducked back under the overhang he'd wedged himself beneath, he heard it. Not wind. Not a branch snapping. Not an animal. A voice. Low. Strained. Like someone trying not to make noise while in pain. Jace went still. His alpha instincts, the ones he kept on a tight leash in daily life, the ones most trained guides learned to regulate early, lit up like a signal flare. Something biological and old and completely beyond logic made the hair on his forearms stand. He moved toward the sound before he decided to. The flashlight swept over pine trunks, over wet undergrowth, over the silver curtain of rain. And then it landed on him. He was tucked between 2 boulder faces, barely sheltered, curled on his side with his arms wrapped around himself. Young, maybe mid-20s, slender, dressed wrong for the altitude, a thin jacket, jeans that were soaked black, no boots worth mentioning. What stopped Jace wasn't the state of him, though. It was his eyes. They opened when the light hit him, and they caught the beam the way no human eyes do. A flash of gold and green, reflective, layered, like looking at a cat in the dark and having the cat look back with the full understanding that you are seen. It lasted less than a second. Then he blinked and it was gone. Hey! Jace kept his voice even. Guide voice. Steady. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to come closer. Okay? The man didn't run. Didn't answer. Just watched him with those impossible eyes and breathed in shallow, careful increments. Nova. Jace frowned. What? My name. His voice was accented in a way Jace couldn't place. Soft consonants, long vowels like words shaped in a mouth that had learned English recently and loved it anyway. Nova. Jace crouched in front of him. He was shivering hard. Pupils too wide. Jaw tight like he was clenching against something. Can you walk? I can do many things. A pause. Then, almost like an afterthought. Currently, walking is difficult. He got Nova back to camp. Set him by the lantern. Stripped the soaked jacket. Wrapped him in every dry layer Jace owned. Made tea from the stove kit. Sat across from him and watched him warm up and tried very hard not to stare at the way he moved. Because Nova moved like nothing Jace had ever seen. Even sitting still, there was this quality to him. Economical. Aware. He didn't fidget, didn't shift unconsciously the way most people do. He tracked movement the way predators do, small calibrations of his head, a slight tilt when the wind changed direction outside the tent, a stillness that wasn't passive. It was poised. His fingers, when they wrapped around the mug, were longer than they should have been. Not grotesquely, just slightly, elegantly wrong. "You're lost," Jace said. Nova looked at him over the rim of the mug. "Yes." "How long?" 3 weeks. No hesitation, like he'd counted every day. 3 weeks. Since the fireball. Jace didn't say that out loud. "Are you hurt?" Nova's gaze dropped briefly to his own chest, then back up. "Less than before." "That's not a no." "It is not," Nova agreed. He had a quality that was hard to name. Not coldness. Warmth ran through everything he said. Warm as the glow Jace kept almost seeing beneath his skin when the lantern caught him at certain angles. A faint luminescence. There and gone. Like bioluminescence. Like deep-sea creatures that carry their own light. Jace told himself it was a trick of the lamp. He didn't entirely believe himself. They stayed up until nearly 4 in the morning. Nova asked questions constantly about trees, about weather patterns, about why humans use tents instead of building proper shelters. He asked with such genuine hunger for the answers that Jace found himself explaining things he'd never had to explain before. Things he knew in his bones without knowing he knew them. The way snowmelt patterns predict spring wildlife movement. The reason high-altitude pines grow in specific spiraling directions based on prevailing wind. Nova listened to all of it with his whole body. By the time they slept, Nova curled on Jace's sleeping mat without self-consciousness. Jace sitting up against his pack because he could not, for reasons he didn't examine, make himself go far. The storm had passed. The sky was the kind of clear that only happens after violence. Absolute. Star-salted. Jace looked up through the tent mesh and found himself thinking about the fireball again. About how close it had looked. The heat started the next morning. Jace recognized it the way you recognize a sound you've never heard before but somehow already know. Some things are instinctive. Some doors, when they open, feel like they were always supposed to open. He woke to Nova sitting up across from him, and the air between them was changed. Dense. Sweet in a way that didn't have a human name for it. Jace's whole nervous system went alert at once. Every alpha instinct he owned snapping online simultaneously. Nova's eyes were fully gold now. No pretense. No human overlay. He was looking at Jace with an expression that was equal parts mortification and something raw and helpless beneath it. "I cannot control this," Nova said quietly. "My biology. It responds to proximity, to compatibility." He paused. "To you. How long have you? Since you found me." A confession plainly given. "I have been managing it. I am less able to manage it now." Jace's chest was doing something complicated. "Are you in pain?" "Not pain." Nova's jaw tightened. "Not exactly." He crossed the distance between them before either of them decided anything. That's how it felt. Like decision was a thing that happened to other people in other moments, and in this moment there was only the pull, the resonance, the specific, irreversible frequency of two things that were always going to collide. Both of them never knew that their union was going to be anything like that. It was not gentle. It wasn't rough either, not exactly. It was necessary, like breathing at altitude, like the body recalibrating to new pressure. Nova moved like water finding its level, like something designed for this that had been waiting for permission. His feline grace, fully expressed now, made every motion fluid and deliberate and devastating. He was stronger than he looked, much stronger. He gave and took with equal precision, reading Jace through some biological antenna that bypassed language entirely. When Jace nodded, that ancient biological lock that sealed an alpha to an omega in the deepest, most irreversible way, Nova went utterly still and then made a sound that Jace would hear for the rest of his life in quiet moments. Not pain. Not just pleasure. Something older than either. Recognition. The psychic thread that formed between them in that moment wasn't metaphor. Jace felt it like a new organ. A warm, luminous line running from his chest to Nova's. Alive. Permanent. They didn't talk about it immediately. This is the odd thing about true intimacy. It doesn't need to be processed out loud right away. They lay tangled together, Nova's head on Jace's chest, Jace's hand moving slowly up and down the ridge of Nova's spine, and neither of them said a word for a long time. "Tell me," Jace finally said. "All of it." Nova was quiet for a moment. Then he told him, not everything at once. In pieces, the way a frightened creature learns to trust. First the smallest truth, then the next, watching for rejection between each one. He was not from here. The crash had not been a meteor. He had not been alone when his vessel entered the atmosphere, but he was alone now, and he did not say why, and Jace did not push. He was Omega by biology, a designation that existed on his world too, differently named, differently shaped, but recognizable. His shapeshifting was native, partial, not complete. He could suppress the feline markers for periods of time, but not indefinitely, especially not under emotional or biological stress. "The people looking for me," Nova said. "They are not rescue." Jace's hand stilled on his spine. "How do you know?" "I can hear them. From very far." He lifted his head. Gold eyes steady. "They carry weapons meant for live capture. They use terminology for me that is." A small pause. "Not rescue terminology." Jace thought about the news reports he'd half heard on his truck radio on the drive up. Search and recovery. Missing hiker. Wilderness emergency. None of that language fit what Nova had just described. "They've been sweeping the valley," Jace said slowly. "I saw their vehicles at the trailhead." "Yes." He sat up. "We need to move you." Nova looked at him for a long moment. That assessing, precise gaze. Like he was calculating whether Jace meant it, whether he could be trusted with this weight, whether this alpha who had known him less than 24 hours was actually going to. "Yes," Nova said softly. "We do." The cave was 4 hours up the ridge, above the treeline, accessible by a route that Jace knew and had never put in any of his official guides. He'd found it 2 years ago during a solo winter scout. It was deep enough to be warm, sheltered from sight below by a granite overhang, fed by a freshwater seep at the back wall. He'd thought of it as a secret for no particular reason. Turned out it had been waiting. He carried most of the gear. Nova moved beside him through terrain that should have been difficult and made it look like walking on flat ground. Even tired, even in a body still recovering from crash injuries he'd never fully explained, he was extraordinary to watch. He found stable footing on loose shale without looking down. He moved through dense brush without making sound. "Stop doing that," Jace told him at one point. Nova glanced over. "Doing what?" "Making me feel inadequate." The smile that broke across Nova's face was... Jace had to look away. It was too much. The way his whole face opened up when something genuinely delighted him. The gold in his eyes warming to something almost amber. "You found me in a storm," Nova said. "In the dark. With no particular reason to help. That's my job." "You are not working now." Jace didn't have an answer to that. They settled into the cave over 3 days. Jace made supply runs down to his truck, careful, staggered, never the same route twice. He brought food, blankets, medical supplies, a solar charging panel for his radio, which he kept on low to monitor the search team communications. Nova spent those 3 days resting in ways that went beyond tiredness. He was healing. Jace could see it happening, faster than any human biology could account for, the bruising fading, the stiff, careful way he'd held himself in the beginning loosening into something natural and easy. They talked constantly. Not about the danger, not always. About Nova's world, the way gravity worked differently there, heavier at the poles, how their seasons were not based on orbit but on magnetic cycles. About the way his people understood scent as language, how an Omega's emotional state was fully legible to any alpha within proximity, how privacy was something that had to be deliberately constructed. "On your world," Nova said one evening, "Omegas are often hidden?" Jace considered that. "Not hidden, but protected, restricted. Depends on the culture." Here too, Nova was looking at the fire. Different shape, same idea. Does it bother you, being Omega? He turned. Does it bother you, being Alpha? Sometimes, Jace admitted. The instincts feel like they belong to someone else. Yes, Nova nodded slowly. The body knows things the mind is still deciding. That night, Nova curled against him while they slept, his head beneath Jace's chin, his hand resting flat on Jace's sternum over his heart. Jace lay awake for a while just breathing, feeling the warm, luminous thread between them pulse with every breath Nova took. He was in love with him. He didn't say it. Not yet. But he knew it the way he knew North. Without checking. The nausea started in Nova's second week in the cave. Jace recognized it before Nova named it. He was a wilderness guide, not a doctor, but he'd been around enough pregnant Omegas. A sister, a former client, friends, to know what morning sickness looked like even when it arrived in an alien body wearing a mostly human face. Nova sat with the knowledge quietly for a full day before telling him. When he did, he watched Jace's face with that careful, measuring attention. Waiting. Jace crossed the cave and sat beside him and put his hand flat against Nova's stomach. Still flat. Nothing showing yet. But warm in a way that was different from the skin around it. A specific warmth. New life already doing its particular work. Okay, Jace said. Nova blinked. Okay. We're going to be okay. Both of you. He pressed slightly. Felt nothing yet with his palm but felt everything with the bond. A faint third frequency now, threading off the main line. New. Delicate. All three of us. Nova's breath hitched. He looked down at Jace's hand on his belly, and then he made a sound Jace had not heard from him before. Something that broke quietly and then put itself back together. Jace wrapped around him from behind. Both arms over his stomach. Chin on his shoulder. He held him while Nova cried, silently, in that controlled Omega way that made the silence hurt more than sound would have. I did not know, Nova said after a while. If this would be. It is, Jace said firmly. It is. The pregnancy moved fast by human standards. Nova's biology had its own timetable. By week 4, the bump was visible. By week 6, it was undeniable, smooth and taut and forward carried. The skin luminous with that faint glow that Jace had first almost seen on the night of the storm. He touched it constantly. Not possessively. Reverently. The way you touch something you can't quite believe is real. He'd press his lips to the swell of Nova's belly first thing each morning. A ritual that started without announcement. Just happened. And Nova never stopped him. Started resting his hand on Jace's head while he did it. Running his fingers through Jace's hair with a tenderness that undid Jace completely every single time. He knows you, Nova said one morning. It was the first time either of them had said he. Jace looked up. I can sense in the bond. Something definite. A presence with direction. Nova smiled. He orients toward you. Jace pressed his ear gently to the bump. Heard nothing. But the bond thread hummed softly, like something listening back. Hey, he said quietly, into the warmth, into the glow. I've got you. Both of you. The search teams moved closer in the 5th week. Nova heard them first. He always did, that extraordinary feline hearing mapping the landscape below in a way Jace could only understand through translation. He'd describe positions, patrol patterns, the emotional tenor of conversations too far away for any human to catch. They found crash material, Nova said one afternoon. His voice was even. His hands were not. Something from the vessel. They know the impact radius now. They are narrowing. Jace checked the radio. The official channel still said missing hiker. But there were secondary frequencies he'd learned to monitor, and the language on those frequencies was different. Clipped. Military cadence. Containment. Specimen retrieval. Thermal scanning of the upper ridge. He looked at Nova. Nova looked at him. There are ways down the north face, Jace said. Rough. But navigable for you. And for you. And for me. Nova was quiet for a moment. The baby is close. Jace crossed the cave in 4 steps and sat beside him and took his face between his hands. Studied him. The gold eyes, the faint glow, the life they'd built in this granite shelter without planning any of it. Without a map or a protocol or a list checked twice. "We go together," Jace said. "When you're ready. Not before." Nova leaned his forehead against Jace's. A gesture from his world Jace had learned. Full contact, forehead to forehead, was the equivalent of a spoken vow. He stayed there. So did Jace. They moved on a night with no moon. Nova led. Even at full term, the pregnancy a heavy beautiful curve he cradled with one arm as he moved. He was faster and quieter than anything Jace had ever seen in these mountains. He felt his way through darkness with senses Jace didn't have names for. He'd stop without warning and hold up one hand, and Jace would freeze, and 40 seconds later they'd hear the distant sweep of a thermal drone passing overhead. Jace stayed close, one hand always available if Nova needed steadying. Never rushing, never pulling, just present. They made it 12 miles from the cave before Nova stopped. They'd found shelter in a dense stand of old-growth fir, a hollow at the root base of a tree that had been down so long it had become part of the soil. Jace helped him settle there, made a bed from his pack and his extra layers, and built the smallest fire he dared between the roots. Nova was very quiet. "How close?" Jace asked. "Soon." He'd known enough about Omegaverse to be useful, though he'd never attended one. Nova's body knew what to do in the specific way that biology knows. Ancient, clear, purposeful. Jace was there for the things biology couldn't provide. Warmth. Steadiness. The alpha frequency of the bond running strong and calm because Nova needed him calm, and so he held Nova's hand. Nova held his back. Neither of them was gentle about it. The forest around them was absolutely still. And then the sound came that Jace would never, for the rest of his life, stop hearing when he needed courage. Small and clear and definite. A voice that had not existed in the world one moment and then did. He was small and dark-skinned and glowing, literally softly. That same luminescence that lived in Nova's skin turned up to something unmistakable. He had Jace's complexion, deep and rich, and beneath it, light. His eyes, when they opened, were exactly Nova's, gold, reflective, layered, already watching the world with that precise and particular awareness. He looked at Jace first. Jace hadn't planned on the sound he made. It wasn't voluntary. Came up from somewhere below language. Nova laughed. Exhausted, ruined, full, and held their son against his chest and reached for Jace with his free hand. Jace came in close, his arm around Nova, his forehead against Nova's temple. 3 bond frequencies now, the third one blazing. "He's perfect," Jace said. His voice was not steady. "Of course," Nova said quietly. "He is ours." They named him Aslo. In Nova's language, it meant the space between stars. The navigable dark. The distance that is also, if you know how to read it, a path. Jace thought that was the most accurate name he'd ever heard for anything. Aslo was 3 weeks old when they crossed the northern border of the search perimeter. Nova had been tracking the withdrawal of the teams through his hearing for days. The narrowing search had pivoted south after a reported sighting near the original crash site. Someone's confused wildlife camera footage that Jace suspected had been deliberately triggered by Nova's keen calculation of their attention. They emerged from the wilderness at a truck stop north of a town small enough to not ask questions. Jace made calls. The kind of calls you make when you've spent 15 years building trust in remote communities, when you know people in places that don't appear on government maps. He didn't explain everything. He didn't need to. He just said he had people who needed to disappear safely and asked if there was room. There was. The house was small, mountain adjacent, deep enough in territory that no satellite pass would mean much and no drone would bother. Nova stood in the doorway the first day and looked at it for a long time. "Is it sufficient?" Jace asked. Nova turned. He had Aslo against his chest in the carrier Jace had acquired, the baby's glowing face pressed to his father's collarbone. Asleep with that absolute infant confidence that the world will hold. "It is more than sufficient," Nova said. He held out his hand. Jace took it. Inside, the fire was already going. Outside, the mountains were doing what mountains do. Standing still, holding history, keeping secrets without being asked. The agents would keep looking. Probably. The frequencies would keep cycling. New jurisdictions would open files. The world, when it decided to want something, tends to keep wanting it. But the world didn't know where they were. And Aslo, glowing softly against his father's chest with those impossible gold eyes and that deep sky luminescence, would grow up knowing exactly two things before he knew anything else. He was loved. He was hidden. And hidden, for now, was safe enough. Some nights, after Aslo was sleeping and the house was quiet and the bond hummed between them like something permanent, because it was, Jace would watch Nova stand at the window looking up. He was always looking at one specific region of the sky. The same direction. The same angle. Jace never asked. He knew. One night Nova said, without looking away from the sky, "Do you sometimes wish that everything could go back to how it was, before you met me?" Jace was quiet for a moment. Not because the answer was complicated. Because he wanted to say it correctly. "No," he said. "Not a second." Nova turned from the window. That gold gaze, all the way across the room, hit him the way it always did. Like the first time. Like it was the first time, always. Like some things don't diminish with familiarity but only clarify. "Neither do I," Nova said. And Aslo, from his cradle in the next room, made a sound in his sleep that was somewhere between a purr and a sigh. Both of them smiled at the same time. Neither of them checked to see if the other one was smiling. They already knew.
If you loved this video, show me some support by subscribing and clicking the notification bell.